In this video, I'm going to show you how you can shoot high quality video in low light conditions with the Insta360 X4, how to get shots like these in difficult conditions where 360 cameras don't usually perform that well, in places where there's only artificial light around at nighttime. Shots like these are usually quite difficult for 360 cameras, but there are some shooting techniques that I'm going to show you and some specific settings that you really need to know so you can get the most out of your Insta360 X4 in these types of conditions. Now the X4, it can shoot 8K 360 video, it has 1/2-inch sensors, so it is one of the better 360 camera options for shooting at nighttime. But it's almost all to do with how you set up your camera, how you use the manual settings, and I'm going to show you exactly what you need to do. So pretty much like all cameras, the X4 features both automatic and manual shooting modes. When you turn on the camera or use it for the first time, it will probably be on the automatic setting, on the automatic mode, which is fine for pretty much all video shot in the daytime. Camera starts to struggle when the sun sets and you're shooting at night, even if there's loads of artificial light around, like in a city. It's the difference between the super dark sky and the really bright lights of city, Christmas lights, whatever you're shooting. This camera really struggles with that, and we need to go into the manual settings and change some things around so the camera can handle that difference better. As you can see in the automatic mode, the video is just way overexposed. It's too grainy, it's too shaky when we're moving, but we can fix all of that. I'm going to take you through the camera settings we're going to change and basically what they mean and why we need to change them. Let's start with ISO. Now, ISO refers to the camera's sensitivity to light. Now, the higher the value, the more sensitive to light, and therefore the brighter your video will be. So if you're in a dark environment at nighttime, you might expect to have to raise the ISO, and then that will fix the problem. It would definitely make your video brighter, but it also results in very grainy video. You know, that fuzziness you see sometimes in videos, that's because the ISO is too high. The value begins at around 100 and can go all the way up to 4,000 or 5,000 depending on the camera. But you should always try and keep the ISO as low as possible, even in dark conditions. You're not going to be keeping it at 100, but we shouldn't really be going over 600, 700. More than that, and the video is going to start to look really grainy and low quality. Next up is shutter speed, which refers to how long the camera shutter is open and is presented in fractions of a second. So shooting at a shutter speed of 100 is displayed as 1-100. Shutter speed affects the brightness of your video and how smooth and crisp moving objects appear in your video. And the final thing we change is white balance, and that affects essentially the color of your video, whether it appears more blue, more yellow, or somewhere in the middle as neutral. A lower value will make the video appear more blue in color, and a higher value will make it appear more yellow. Now, before we go into the settings, there is one thing about the X4 you need to know. I mentioned it can shoot 8K 360 video, which is really, really high resolution, very sharp, and a great feature of this camera. However, you'll notice when you select the 8K resolution in the camera and you're out at nighttime or in a low light environment, the camera will actually suggest that you switch to 5.7K because the camera, when shooting in 8K, just can't capture enough light. So the video will be darker than you want, really. Now, you can stay on 8K and use these manual settings, which will improve the quality of the video, which will improve the appearance, but switching to 5.7K will make your life easier as the camera just is able to pick up more light using that setting. So let's get into these settings. Let's start off by assuming that your camera is motionless. It's still, it's on a tripod and you're capturing video without moving your camera because the settings will be slightly different when we're moving. So let's start off with the best settings for shooting still video. You'll see on the screen the exact settings I used for shutter speed, ISO, and white balance. And then the goal is to keep the dark areas as dark as possible and the light areas as crisp, colorful, and properly exposed. Now, in the situation where the camera is not moving, where it's still, I set the shutter speed to 60. Now, the reason I'm doing this is because I'm shooting at 30 frames per second. And as a general rule, particularly if it's not moving, if the camera's still, you should set the shutter speed to twice the frame rate. So this is a fairly low shutter speed. It allows your camera the time to take in more light per frame. And thanks to having a low shutter speed, you could also set the ISO to a fairly low setting and not have to worry about that grain and fuzziness. I think anything of 200, 320 or 400 will be ideal in situations like this. If you're shooting in kind of an extremely low light situation, even if the camera is still, then you would raise that ISO further, maybe to 600 or 700. But let's take a look at what you need to do if you're shooting moving video, which probably for a lot of the time you will be. This is a camera that has great stabilization. It's all about shooting those dynamic shots, those moving shots. So the settings for moving video in low light is going to be different. Let's take a look. So basically, when moving with the camera, you want to ensure that any lights captured in your video aren't shaky or blurred, which is almost certain to happen when shooting in auto mode. In a lot of low light videos, when people shoot their Christmas lights or at night time, you can tell when they're moving, you can tell when their feet hits the ground because the camera shakes and those lights shake. It's really difficult for the camera to stop that shakiness in auto mode. So there are definitely ways to minimize or even remove this entirely. For moving video, the most important thing by far is to set the shutter speed to a higher value. And you're going to want to set the shutter speed up to at least 100 or maybe 200th of a second, depending on how much light is available. The more light that's available, the lower you can go. The less light that is available, the higher the shutter speed needs to be. When you set that high shutter speed, the video is going to look dark. You see in the preview, it gets very dark. You're probably not going to be able to see very many details at all. That's because the higher the shutter speed, the less time the camera has to take in the light. So to offset this, we need to up the ISO. If the shutter speed is set at 1/100th of a second, the ISO is probably going to have to be around 500 or 600. Hopefully this won't make your video too grainy, and obviously just check the preview. If there is loads of artificial light, see if you can get away with setting the ISO a bit lower. But it's the high shutter speed that gets rid of the shakiness and just makes your video look a lot smoother. Now, I haven't mentioned white balance yet, and that's mostly because it doesn't really affect the quality of the video. It just affects the color, and it's kind of a preference. I would recommend looking at the kind of lights you're capturing and changing the color balance based on that. A rule I go by is if most of the artificial lights I'm capturing, if they're white, so Christmas lights that are white, then I would set a lower white balance which will give it a kind of bluish tinge, which I think looks great in a wintry shot. For colorful lights, I would set a more neutral value to between 3,800 and 4,000, which keeps colors looking as they do in reality. And if you're capturing warm lights, that is yellowish lights, if you want to kind of give a warm feeling, then set the white balance to around 5,000 and you'll get that warm yellowish hue. So those are some general settings you could start off with, and they would certainly work in most situations, particularly the moving video, definitely making sure you're setting that shutter speed higher. You could obviously copy the exact settings I put in this video, but just be aware of your own surroundings and of how much light is available and tweak the settings based on that. But there are some tips and tricks for keeping your low light video looking good just in terms of editing and in how you shoot. The first is to use a tripod or monopod that is fairly large and has a fairly large base. Using something like this, which is fairly attached to the camera quite close, it's not going to offer the best results because there's not much here dampening the vibration and the movement. You're going to want something, honestly, that's like quite big. Something like this would be ideal. With a larger base, the larger the monopod, tripod, or selfie stick you use, the more it dampens the vibrations between you and the camera. Also, holding with two hands, not with one, holding with two hands and being very meticulous in how you move the camera around, even tensing your muscles, that offers some vibration dampening and will reduce the chances of your low light video looking shaky. Following those rules for shooting should offer a little bit of an advantage when shooting in low light. When you're editing, even if you're doing some basic editing in the app, adjusting the highlight and the shadow values can really bring out the difference between light and dark, and maybe upping the saturation if you want to bring out the color in the lights. Making some slight adjustments there can really make a difference to your low light videos. Okay guys, so that's it. That is my guide for shooting low light videos with the Insta360 X4. If you follow the settings that I laid out and my tips and tricks, you should be able to get some much better quality than if you didn't use those settings. If you want even more detailed instructions on how to shoot low light video, or indeed how to use your X4 in general, then check out my Ultimate Insta360 video course. All of these shots will be available there. I'll be going into more detail about low light video as well in the course. There's There's also about 70 lessons available there, teaching you how to set up, shoot, and edit for dozens of different kinds of shots. So if you really want to master your Insta360 X4, then check out my course. I've got a discount in the description below for you guys as well. But that's it, guys. Until next time, I will see you around. Bye.